perspective, people should understand that 10, 15 years ago, public pension investment contracts and investment records were never regarded as trade secrets. They were routinely disclosed, and this trade secret or proprietary business information exemption from public records laws, which, as I mentioned earlier, eviscerates public records law, is relatively new in the history of public pension funds. And it's come about as a result of Wall Street selling the highest cost, highest risk, least transparent investments ever devised: hedge funds, private equity funds, fund of funds, venture capital funds. But historically, these investment contracts were always routinely made available to the public, and those of us who've been working in the pension space know this to be true.
Any other questions?
Yeah, hi, this is Noah Blunda with Hannah News Service. Mr. Dann, what you just said about trying to find information about specific funds, can you elaborate and maybe use a little less, a little more plain language as to what exactly you mean?
Well, so here's what we're concerned about. A couple of different things. Andy and I actually a couple of years ago now ended up suing on behalf of John Damschroeder, one of your former colleagues, the PERS pension plan. And the issue was a fund called the Glouston Midwest Funds, in which it turned out that PERS was the only investor in the fund. At the end of the litigation, what PERS and Glouston both agreed to admit publicly was that even though the contract they have with each other required Glouston to provide and allowed PERS to analyze the fund level transactions that were going on in order to draw their own conclusions about the how well that investment is doing, what its performance is, that neither Glouston never offered and had never offered, and to my knowledge still has not offered, and PERS has not required that they fulfill that term of the contract. So these private equity investments, this in the case of Glouston, it was a fund of funds. These hedge funds, they operate in darkness, and essentially the STRS and their very well-paid investment staff simply rely on what those funds tell them the performance is, and don't even in their own reporting factor in some of the costs that are associated in fees, like the fees that we're seeking here, or that we're looking at in this analysis by CEM. So those are the things that we're looking at. These things happen transparently, and there's a reason why this happens. The investment managers are all on bonuses at STRS, and the fact is that that amazingly, we're not aware of any private equity or hedge fund or fund of funds that has ever, well, except one now, that has ever reported to STRS that they were doing anything except making money. But we're concerned that nobody's taking a close look at those, and those highly paid, highly skilled staffers, some of the highest paid people in state government work for STRS and the investment staff, that we're not putting that expertise to work to make sure that these funds are working for the STS stakeholders. It escapes me for the moment, Ted, but you'll know off the top of your head. There was the fund in Texas that completely imploded. What was the name of that?
Panda.
The Panda Fund. So that's now officially the first fund that anybody has acknowledged, actually the first of the alternative investments ever conducted by STRS, that STRS has admitted lost money. And of course, in that one, it was catastrophic. They lost all the money in that investment. That's why it's so important to have this transparency. So experts like Ted and so the individual members can evaluate, and the board of the pension funds, who are all lay people who aren't investment professionals, are able to evaluate how the fund is doing, and whether the mix of funds is correct. And it's amazing, but in this very, very bull market that's gone on for the last decade, our funds have not recovered to the extent that one would hope they would, including STRS. And I'm sure that'll be part of Ted's analysis as well.
Yeah, one of the things I want to point out is what's so insidious about this lack of transparency is that there are really two levels of transparency here. What are the investment managers telling STRS? That's one level. And then the other level is what is STRS disclosing to the public? So if STRS will show us nothing that has been provided to them, we don't know whether the board or the staff of STRS is getting information regarding the underlying investments, the strategies, the performance. So the transparency is doubly, there are two issues. One is what's being disclosed to STRS by Wall Street, and the other is what STRS is willing to disclose to the public to show that they're fulfilling their fiduciary duties. And what the investigation has already found is that STRS routinely has in their contracts that managers will withhold information provided to STRS, and that might be disclosable to the public. There are provisions in these contracts drafted by STRS which are intended to thwart public disclosure, including that if there is a request for disclosure, both parties to the contract will advise the other in time to allow either party to challenge public disclosure. And in my opinion, that is not, public pensions should not be involved in efforts to thwart public scrutiny.
And it begs the question of whether they have something to hide. Any other questions?
I have one more. Mr. Seidle, can you talk about just proportionally or in perspective, how can sort of misallocation of funds and investment expenses compare to just the general trend of pension funds across America kind of lowering their investment expectations, which has contributed a lot to the squeeze of benefit cuts and COLA pullbacks and things like that? I mean, proportionally, how do those things compare as feeding into the things that the Retired Teachers Association are concerned about in regard to their benefits?
Well, one of the things that's surprising about the discussion about underfunded pensions is people tend to focus on how much money has been going into public pensions and how much money is paid out in the form of benefits. And there's a lot of attention paid to the fact that perhaps too much money is going into pensions and that the benefits are too rich. The one element that no one really looks at is the investment program. How has management of the investments over time caused the pension to underperform and to the underfunding to increase? And for example, fees of 1 or 2% a year over time will reduce the benefit, the pension assets over time, 30, 40, 50%. So that's why we focused on fees and we focus on management of the investments as opposed to the benefits and the money going in and the money going out. My forensic investigations, and I've done over 1 trillion of forensic investigations, have in every case concluded that the pension had enough money going in and that the benefits were not too rich. It was the gross mismanagement over time, what I call gross malpractice, generally practiced, is what has caused the pension to become chronically underfunded and potentially endangered. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Mark, this is Jim Province again. These cases tend to be referred to mediation whenever they're filed. So if this is going to be the first one that you're going to be filing, how will that be affected by having to go through mediation on each one?
Well, it certainly is going to maybe slow us down a little bit. But what we're hoping is that we can, and we may just push ahead to litigation here because we think that this is such a pervasive issue with STRS then I'm not terribly confident that they're going to come to mediation and we're going to be able to get it resolved. I mean, we'll certainly do what the court orders us to do, and we'll try to work it out. But if we have to work it out one at a time, at least we'll have the oversight of the court in that process. But at the end of the day, I really think these are issues that have to be litigated. That the future of this of the state. I mean, it's interesting. Ted said there's 15 million people relying on pensions in the country. 1.5 million of them live in Ohio. So it's a big number of people in the state that are being affected by this. Our economy depends on on the solvency of these pension funds, their ability to eat and to take care of their family and to put a roof over their head and to buy groceries. It all depends on this. So we think these issues are very, very important, and they need to be ultimately be resolved. So I know we have Ted's support for that as lawyers and the retired teachers, and I think that the public interest is in making sure that this doesn't continue to happen over and over again. That if the retired teachers want to go out and raise over $100,000 to pay an expert to help them see if their investments are being properly and wisely invested, then they ought to be able to have access to the information they need to do the job. I just think that's just axiomatic under Ohio law, and I can't imagine that there's a single member of the Ohio Supreme Court that wouldn't agree.